Hi guys, welcome to the Watch Hobbyist channel with me, Wayne, and if you aren't already, make sure you check out my Instagram, which is @WatchHobbyist. Today I've got these Omega Seamasters. Now, the two either side are the newest model, the latest model. They're 42mm, and the middle one is one of the earliest Seamaster professionals, if not, I think, possibly the first model. It's a bit old now, it's missing some of its loom from its second hand, but I thought it'd be good to see it as part of a comparison review. Now, you're probably wondering why I've got a blue one and a black one, and it's basically because I could not make my mind up when it came to purchasing this. I think jeweler's lighting played a part, because it's so difficult sometimes to actually understand the colour or the sheen of a watch when it's under these very harsh lights that the jewelers tend to use. But it really gave me an issue, because a first world issue definitely, but I just couldn't decide. So I noticed that I went to one jeweler's and looked at the watches and thought the blue was really nice. Then I was in Las Vegas last year when these had just sort of first come to market, and I think it's the crystals shops over there have like a really good natural amount of light coming through. There's like skylights in the ceiling of the shopping centre, and I had a look at what they had was the black one, and I hadn't really noticed the black one properly before, but under the natural light it looked fantastic, and I thought, yeah, that's the one I really want. And then recently again I saw the blue one and I was like, oh, I don't know what to do here. So the blue for me is how it should be. It should always be blue, the Seamaster, but because I'd really noticed the sort of sheen and look of the black one at that time in Las Vegas, that's why I didn't really know which colour to go with. So I have now made a decision. I have actually sold one of these watches. I'll tell you which one I've kept at the end. But just looking into the watch, so this is a model that's a little bit, I don't know, it caused a little bit of controversy, didn't it, when it came out, because it's got a couple of features on it that people aren't so sure about. It's the usual thing. When you first see the watch, you see it in photos. They're usually CGI rendered. You can't really tell too much. The details are exacerbated, so you know there's a guy spending, or a woman spending 20 hours trying to sort of improve the look of this on a computer to make it look really good. So I don't think it's really fair to look at a photo on, say, the Omega website and think, yeah, that's the one. You have to see a watch, as with any, especially these, in the flesh. And really what sort of stands out to me with this model now is just the sheer quality for the price point. So yes, you've got Tudor, a similar price point. A lot of people like Tudor. I've had a few Tudors, and really I prefer like sort of the first relaunch models, like the Black Bays with the ETA movements. I've actually got a Black Bay Black with an ETA movement, but you know, they're my favourites. The more recent offerings, I've noticed quite a few people saying sort of like the Pelagos, the looms falling out of the bezel and things like that. So I'm not hating on Tudor, it's just that I feel that for the price and the quality, personally I don't think you can get better than Omega at the minute. And their prices have increased recently. That's a real shame. With this new model, it's actually increased by quite a lot here in the UK at least. So for example, I think the last model, the final price was something like 2950 in British pounds, and then the new model came out at 3600, which is what this is. So £3,600. Obviously it's dearer than some of the competition, but like I say, I do feel it's just the better watch. I do feel it's a better quality piece. And I also feel like the improvements that they've made to the watch have actually worked, which is not always the case. Sometimes manufacturers do take a step backwards with things as well. So I've got a few notes to go through, and I think that if you're looking for a diver in this sort of price range at the minute, for me personally, I don't think you're going to go wrong. Now, if we look at the original model, it's thin. I'd say it's probably thinner. I'm going to measure it in a second, so I'll get the camera to focus. It is quite a thin watch. It's actually not that heavy. I used to think these were quite heavy, but the new model I would imagine is quite a bit heavier. I've not weighed it. I'll try and get some weights. But overall, like the clasp, it's very in line with the bracelet, things like that. You've got an aluminium bezel, and the blue wave pattern on the dial, it's very unpronounced compared to the new model, and also if you notice there are quite a lot of reflections going on with the crystal, because these I think only have an interior anti-reflective crystal. I don't think they have anything on the outside as well. So you tend to get a very different looking watch compared to what the modern one is. So I know it has deviated, the new one, quite a bit from the older one. There's still some sort of, you know, traits that are from the bloodline of the watch, but it is quite a different sort of design overall. The bracelet tries to be the same, but I'm going to show you all these things on the new one in a minute. But I just wanted to give sort of like a baseline showing you this watch first. This is a classic without a doubt, but it also has classic traits, and like I say, one of those things for me is the reflections that go on. So it's not actually too bad now, as you can see the camera there, but on a bright sunny day, whenever I've worn an older Seamaster in the past, it's always annoyed me because I've always had to sort of angle the watch to see the time. The hands aren't particularly large. I actually, of the older models, I think the sword hand model is brilliant, but these skeletons, they're sometimes a little bit difficult to see, for me personally anyway, maybe not for you. The white date wheel, I don't know, I think it just, I've always wanted it to be like sort of matching the dial, but I don't mind it. But this is just an older watch now. It doesn't have any adjustment on the clasp other than sort of an actual dive extension which you can pull out there, so that's your only adjustment. So obviously, you know, if your wrist gets hot during the day, that's not going to be any good to you because that's just way too much of an adjustment. And you know, things change over time, and of course there'll be people that absolutely love the older stuff, and I just happen to really like the new models. So we'll start by looking at the black one here. So you can see, yes, there are some reflections, but you're not actually sort of seeing the camera sort of take over the dial and not be able to see the time type of thing. You've also got this hugely deep glossy dial going on with a deep glossy bezel. Now some people, I understand, don't like that. For me, I find it adds usability to the watch. It adds some extra sort of depth to it for starters, and it also means that this watch is a one watch solution to pretty much every situation you could ever imagine. So whether you're at the beach going swimming or whether you're going to a nice meal, it's still going to look great. Now a couple of controversial little bits that I think when it first came out. Firstly, there's this helium escape valve, which you'll see on the older model is very unpronounced. It's sort of there, but you know it's there, but you're not really sort of noticing it too much. It's quite well hidden. On this newer model, it's quite large. People have compared it to a Reese's Buttercup, and I think that's pretty obvious why. But it's also quite large and maybe could have been a bit smaller, but actually when it's on the wrist you don't really notice it. It just becomes another part of the design. And you can't really have a Seamaster Professional without a helium escape valve. I'm sure by now they could integrate some kind of automatic one like a Sea Dweller, that type of thing, but it's kind of synonymous with the actual model itself. It's a bit like having a Rolex Submariner date and then not having a Cyclops on it. It's kind of just part and parcel of it, and some people will love that and some people will hate it. The other thing as well is that in pictures I find it very pronounced and very obvious, but the minute track that's just above sort of the markers, if my camera actually decides to focus, so you see there's like a railway track type thing going around, but it's in blocks, and some people didn't like that in the pictures I noticed when it first came out. Actually, in reality, it really isn't noticeable. In fact, it actually adds to the design, it adds to the legibility of the dial, and it just sort of helps break up the minute section. So I don't mind it at all. I think it looks really good. The triangle around the lume pip, I think if they would have gone for a full luminous triangle it would have looked too much like something like the Pelagos, that sort of watch. So I like how it has that. It's sort of got its own unique character scenario going on there, and it's just overall for me, I think, a very, very, very high quality piece. So I've got the two blue ones here side by side, and you'll see actually under certain lighting the colours are actually quite similar. So they've managed to get the ceramic to go towards the older models. You'll also notice the difference in the wave dial here. On the right hand side on the new model, it's just so much more in your face and obvious, but to me in a really nice way. I think it adds hugely to the design of the watch. Obviously when they were first releasing the teasers to this watch, they announced it with waves on Instagram, places like that, and you know, people expected it was going to be a Seamaster, but you don't know how it's going to look until they actually do it. And then when I saw pictures, I wasn't that sold on it, but I think you can see how much difference there is when you move the watch around, just to the actual depth of those waves. And obviously they're ceramic now, so the whole dial is ceramic, the bezel is ceramic, and it just really brings out the gloss in the, you know, in the actual waves as well. So it gives them like a real 3D depth. And at first I wasn't so sure when I saw it, but now that I've had the watch for a few days, I've worn it around the house a bit while I was deciding which colour to actually keep and not sell. Now that I've actually sort of seen these waves properly, they now look really, really spectacular. I think they've done a really, really good job, whereas like the older model, they don't really sort of get too pronounced, and then you know, it's what you know the Seamaster for is the wave dial, but actually now the wave dial is as good as it's ever been, if you ask me. Also on the dial, you'll notice that the hands are really large and they just work really, really well. If you look at the older model compared to the newer model, you can see that there's a big difference in the size of the hands, and actually for reading the time that makes a big, big difference. Also, the hands and the hour markers are absolutely filled with lume on the new one, and you have a different colour to the minute lume compared to the rest of it. So I think it's green on the minute and the rest of it is like an aqua blue. So the luminescence as well is fantastic, although as usual with Omega you do find that the green does die off and it ends up going to more of an aqua colour anyway. One thing I did struggle with in terms of the design was the end links, because I'll show you a wrist shot now. So you can see that the end link actually sort of has a real perpendicular sort of drop to it, and then the bracelet starts. You might be able to get a better shot here, where it's just the end link sort of falls within the lugs of the watch. Now the Sea Dweller from Rolex, people always complain that the end link actually protrudes from the end of the case lugs, and I've always said it's because it will give it a sort of nicer flow to the bracelet, and I think this watch kind of proves it. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad thing, but I do think that the end link just fitting within the lug there just means that that drops off, and then suddenly, you know, so if you have quite a wide wrist, I actually have quite a small wrist, as you probably noticed, so for me it's not so bad, but I think if you had a wider wrist and this starts to sort of have to come around and curve around the wrist, you'll notice it even more, because it's sort of like a drop and then into the bracelet. I think they could have possibly designed this a little bit better. And also falling into the bracelet, I think that a tapered bracelet may have worked a little bit better. Now don't get me wrong, I actually find this bracelet to be fantastic. It's very, very, very high quality. It's never going to break, it's never going to have an issue. It uses screws at the end, so you know, nice and tight with sort of thread lock and everything. No pins and tubes anymore on these watches like you get with the older models here, where it's just like basically you hammer a tube into a pin into a tube, and then the friction just holds it all together. You know, now we have screws, things like that. So quality wise it's brilliant, but I think if the watch had a taper bracelet it would just suit it a bit better. I sometimes feel a bracelet that's not been tapered in some way just looks a little bit unfinished. I mean, I'm not saying it needs to be like you know, an Udom or Piguet or anything like that, where they have some of the best bracelets you can get, but I think a taper would just suit it a little bit better. And then moving on to the clasp, if we look at that, so first of all it's a lot thicker than the original model. It's a good bit thicker. You can see here hopefully the difference. It's possibly about another third as thick, but on the wrist you don't really notice it. What you do notice is that it feels a lot more secure. It does definitely feel heavier as a component. When you've got it in your hand like this, you can definitely feel the weight of it. But of course we also have the extension, which you just press the button, pull the bracelet, and you suddenly get a huge amount of extension. So And then on top of that, I've not actually done it on this one. I think you just, well, in fact, I don't, I don't want to do it because I don't know exactly how to at this point. But I think, just like the other one extends with the diver's clasp, I think this is exactly the same basically. So you not only have the sort of adjustability which you can use day to day, but then you have the diving scenario as well. So if you're going to wear this watch on a bracelet all the time, you don't really have to worry about it. You know, if you do sort of dive or whatever, or you do use it in those sort of scenarios, or you put it over a coat maybe, if you go exploring or something, you know, you've got these extra functions with this clasp. So yes, it's thick, and yes, it's quite heavy, but like I say, once it's on the wrist you don't really notice. And also because it's heavy, it sort of balances the head out a bit, because the head is quite heavy on this watch. It's got a new movement, and it's all adding to the weight. You know, you've got all these different components going on, and for some reason in 2019 or 2018 when this came out, it seems like every manufacturer thinks they have to make a watch as heavy as possible to make it feel really good quality, and it's definitely worked. But at the same time, sometimes what you can end up with is sort of an unbalance to the head, and then it sort of rolls off the wrist quite annoyingly. The bezel is very, very smooth, so go backwards. There's no backwards movement on it whatsoever. It has the loom pip, like I say. The font is quite large on it, but I feel like they've chosen the right font for that. I don't think it looks out of place. I think the whole watch is a very, very modern incarnation of a watch that's been around for many, many years. So there's always going to be bits that you're not sure about at first, but I think as time goes on, this will look great. The previous model to this had no waves on the dial, and I always felt it was just lacking a little bit in its design. It was like a little bit plain. It was a lovely watch, and it also had this incredible gloss to the dial as well without the waves. But this one to me just modernises it a bit further and just gives it a bit more interest. So it's slightly bigger than the last one. I think the last one was 41.5mm. This is 42mm. So we have a movement here with a 55-hour power reserve. I've been timing it, and it seems pretty much bang on accurate, both of them actually. So if I unscrew the crown here, and now we get to the point where we can actually change it. Now, if I pull to the first sort of position on the crown, the date you have to wind backwards to actually get it to move. So you're going anti-clockwise, which I find a bit strange. So you go backwards to go forwards. One thing that I do wish they had integrated is the quick set hour hand. I'm really a big fan of that. So when we go away, say we go to Europe, you know, and you're just 1 hour ahead, it's nice to not have to stop the time, go 1 hour ahead, and then put all the crown back in. I really prefer it when you've got a quick set hour hand. It's a shame they didn't integrate that. I'm sure they could have done. They have it on all the Speedmasters with, you know, movements that are also their own. So I'm sure they could have done that, but they didn't for some reason. I'm hoping down the line that they bring out a GMT version. I think if they brought a GMT version out of this watch, it would actually be my perfect watch. So they haven't yet, but Omega, if you're watching, please do that. The last one was really, really good, but unfortunately had terrible reflections on the dial, which is why I sold my last one very, very quickly, because the crystal just made it so you couldn't read the time. If they did it on this model, I think it would be integrated much better. If I pull the crown all the way out like that, it gives a really, really nice solid click. There's no movement in it at all. Some watches, when you actually pull it out, there's a little bit of leeway and you're just not sure if it's quite gone onto the correct sort of point in the movement to be able to change it or not. And I've had it a few times where after winding a watch, some watches seem a bit funny. Rolexes are sometimes a bit pernickety when it comes to sort of winding a watch and then setting the time. So if you've started it from scratch, you sometimes have to put the crown back in, pull it out. It seems to be a thing with Rolex. I've not had that with this, so it seems like a really well put together movement. And then if we look at the case back, there is actually a clear case back to show the movement. Unfortunately, I've got some stickers on here because I've just not got round to removing them yet because I wasn't sure which watch I was keeping. But underneath here we do have a really nice looking movement. It's got the same sort of rotor that you find it in the Planet Ocean models, where it's got like a sort of grooved effect to it. It looks really, really good. You can see the balance spring and everything like that. So you can see a nice amount of the movement from, you know, in comparison to some other watches which you can't see the movement at all. This is actually a nice movement to look at. And also what I really like is like the sort of scalloped case back here, it's not like a standard case back which would normally have like grooves in it at certain points for you to be able to unscrew that. This has a specific design to it, so that's also not a great thing because it probably will have to go to Omega for servicing, but to be fair, that's only where I'd send it anyway. But if you were thinking like down the line you might want to service this with an independent, they would probably have to have the correct tooling. The watch is 300 meters water resistant. They haven't changed that. I'm sure by now this could have improved on that, but then again 300 meters is more than fine. I've been swimming in the past with watches with 30 meter ratings like Speedmasters, never had an issue. They're absolutely generally fine in my experience. I wouldn't recommend it, but you know, I've never had a problem, that's what I'm saying. So 300 meters, you know, and it's about synonymous with the watch, but you know, this one's thinner, the older one, and they're both the same water resistance rating, so sometimes people get a bit miffed about that. For me, I don't see the thickness as anything. I think there's is it a Bell & Ross or something like that, that's really, really incredibly thin, but it's designed with oil inside and it's 1200 meters water resistant. So, you know, you can design things in different ways, and the water resistance just comes in there somewhere, but it doesn't always relate to the thickness of the case. It's just the sort of strength of the materials used as well. The finish of the watch has really impressed me. So we've got satinized areas going on the side, finish with polished areas. I mean, if you look at the clasp, that's one good way to see sort of the finishing going on here, which hopefully it will show up. There's like a little sort of polished chamfered edge even on the clasp, which I just think is really, really well done. It's, you know, it looks machined but in a good way, and we have sort of really nice polished lugs here going on. You've got the satinized bracelet with the polished sections to the centres, which is obviously very reminiscent of this model. But if you compare the finishing of the older model, where it's just all flat and just pretty standard brushed effect, versus the newer model, which now has many more polished areas going on, sort of around this area as well, where you've got like the sort of the side of the case, and then it starts to taper down to the back of the case. You've got polish there. You've got a little bit of polish, I think, just on the edge of the bezel I can see. So, you know, in terms of finishing, I think they've done a really, really good job. You're never going to get sort of the levels of finish on something 10 times the price at this price point. It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, for this price point, certainly for me, if I compare it to something like a Black Bay or a Pelagos, you know, I know which one I'd rather have in terms of the case design and the case finish. It makes a real difference to the watch. Also with the movement, I've noticed how quick you can set the time. So what I mean by that is the gearing when it comes to actually moving the hands. Sometimes some watches, they have very, very, very slow movement. So you'll do one rotation of the crown and it will maybe move, you know, a few minutes on the dial, and it means you're winding and winding and winding, and it takes forever to set the time. This watch, however, it's just one rotation of the dial pretty much gets you an entire hour. So although it's not got the quick set hour hand, it sort of makes up for that, because if you just do it pretty carefully, you'll get back to exactly the same point. That's a really good feature. A lot of Seikos have that, and I always notice how good that is, but a lot of really expensive watches don't have that, and it does take quite a while to set the time sometimes. I think little things like this are what make the Seamaster the watch it is, but you don't really notice it until you get it. And then just going back to the bracelet, one thing I have considered is I've got like an Omega NATO here, and then this is a very high quality NATO, very similar to the Omega but a lot cheaper. This is from Nomon Watches, I think they're based in Hong Kong. Really, really fantastic quality strap, and I was thinking, certainly with the blue here, that matches very, very well. And then the black would go nicely with this Bond NATO, or perhaps they do an actual full black NATO at Omega now. Obviously you can pick up much cheaper NATOs, but the Omega ones are actually really, really good quality. I would absolutely recommend them. Now I'm going to show you the measurements, so let's just compare it to the old one as well. So if I just take my calipers here, the official measurement is 42mm for the diameter. I'm just going to 0 that, that's fine. Let's have a look at the diameter of the watch on my calipers here. So it always depends where you do it. It's a bit hard with the Reese's Buttercup thingamajig. So across the watch is 44mm, and then if we bring the caliper sort of diagonal across, it's somewhere in the region of 42. It's possibly a little bit larger, it just depends on, like I say, where you actually put the calipers, but it's in the region of what Omega say at 42mm. In terms of length, it's actually 49.8, so just a little bit under 50, and I actually find any watch under 50 I can wear, so I just about get away with it. I'll probably show another wrist shot in a second. But I do just about get away with that, so 49.8. And then if I look at the thickness here, so I'm going from like the centre of the actual watch, because the crystal on this watch is actually a little bit of a dome to it, as is quite common with divers' watches, and it's literally about 14 or so millimeters depth, which is actually very, very acceptable for a modern day dive watch. There's quite a few out there that's sort of 15, 16. And of course 1mm doesn't sound a lot, but in a watch which is a small object, suddenly it does start to actually make a difference. Oh, and just so I can show you, the bracelet width is about almost 20mm, so if you were to get like a 20mm strap, it would fit absolutely fine. Basically Omega do a lot of 19mm, 20mm, 21mm straps, so you could get a 20 and be absolutely fine with it. But there's also pretty much every strap company out there does 20mm straps, if not all of them. So it's great if you want to sort of play around with straps on this watch. And then we'll go for the same sort of measurements on the older model here. So that is, yeah, that's more like 41mm, which is what it is actually officially. So it's about 1 to 1.5 mils smaller in diameter. But I always find diameter isn't really a great sort of reference point. If we look here though, you'll see that actually the newer one was 44, or about 43. So in terms of overall size on the wrist, it's not that much difference. Now if we look at the length of the watch, it might be 47.5. So yeah, on the wrist it's quite a big difference. That you're talking almost 3mm. So that's quite a lot when it comes to length, because if you think about it, that's sort of like almost 1/3 of a centimetre. And when you start comparing the size of a watch on somebody's wrist, that can make a fair difference. In terms of thickness, I think this is where we'll see a difference as well. So the other one was 14, this is 11.7. Now remember, this watch has an ETA movement inside of it. I think it's about 38 hour power reserve, something like that, compared to the 55 of the new one. The accuracy probably isn't as good, although I'm sure it's still pretty good. I haven't measured this for absolute years, but I'm sure you know, it won't be quite as accurate as the new model. But that's kind of one direction that a lot of manufacturers have gone. They've tried to improve accuracy. The new model has the METAS movement, which is sort of all the standards that Omega now follow versus like COSC and companies like that. Omega do METAS, which is their thing, and it's got to be within so many seconds accurate and everything. I don't really care personally about accuracy too much. It doesn't really bother me. If a watch is 3 seconds or 4 seconds or even 10 seconds out a day and you work it out over a week, then, or to me personally, if you work it out over a weekend, because quite often I'll only wear watches like this at the weekend, so it's never going to affect me. But obviously if you're working for NASA or you're working in some really important timing job, you would probably need better accuracy, but then you probably wouldn't be using a dive watch. I just wanted to sort of finish up with which one did I actually go for, and basically this has been my choice when I was looking at the watch. So all the time that the model has been announced, I've never known which actual colourway I would go with. I quite often like blue watches, but I'm a bit funny as to which hue of blue they actually use. And then the black in this model I think is great, but is it a Seamaster if it's black? And actually on this model I think the black now starts to come into play. On the previous models the black never worked for me on the Seamaster. on this model, I think it really does. It actually is something you should definitely consider. There's other models as well. There's a grey dial, silver dial, but for me I was just a bit concerned about the legibility and also the date wheels white. So it's just things like that, whereas the date wheels on the blue and the black, they actually match the dial. I think it looks really good. So it was, you know, you're spending a lot of money and it is a first world issue, but you're also sort of debating, well, which one would I keep for the rest of my life type of thing, because that's the way I always look at a watch. Whether I actually keep a watch more than 2 weeks sometimes is another thing, but I'm sure that's like a few of us. But actually I always look at it for from a long-term perspective. And first I got the blue one and I thought, no, actually I don't like the blue. It doesn't look right. In certain lightings it has sort of like a sort of more aqua-y, turquoisey sort of colour, which didn't really seem to suit the watch. And then I got hold of the black one because I thought that was going to be the one that I keep. And then for some reason ended up going back to the blue, and I've actually already sold this black one at this point to a friend. So don't get me wrong, the black one is fantastic. It's just that in the end I think still I'm a traditionalist at heart, and I think I still have to keep a Seamaster that's blue. You've got the waves. Waves are usually blue. You know, this is obviously based on a sea theme. It's the Seamaster, and I think the blue just really suits it. Also, the fact that the blue, in some lights, I mean, if I sort of change the angle of the watch here, you'll see that actually the blue goes so dark sometimes it almost looks black, versus when you change it into the light, it goes a completely different colour. So I like the versatility of that, whereas the black is just always black. And I think the blue therefore just stands out for me as the winner of the two, but I don't think you can go wrong with any of these models. So I hope you've enjoyed this little review. I know it's been on a while, but I just really wanted to go quite in depth into the watch. And if you liked it, please give me a thumbs up or comment on the video. You're always welcome to comment. And please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to check me out on Instagram, which is @WatchHobbyist. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.